Welcome to our podcast, No Time to Cry. This is our first episode and we're your hosts. I'm Shannon.
And I'm Laura.
And this episode is going to be a bit of context behind what the podcast is going to be, why we're doing it, and a bit about us really.
Yeah, and we wanted to give you a little bit of an insight into our grief journeys so far, how we've navigated them individually, but also how we've supported each other and how we've also been supported by our support network, our loved ones, friends and family, and hopefully other people, not just those of you who are going through grief yourselves, but for people that care about you to be able to tune into some of this to try and get a perspective on what they can do to give you that support that you need.
And that's probably a good place to start, isn't it? So let's do some intros. Let's tell the listeners about ourselves and how we met and became friends and where this kind of podcast come from. And then we can talk a little bit about the podcast itself. But I think if anybody's found it so far, it's probably been from our social media that gives a bit of a heads up that it's going to be about grief, loss, friendships, the trials of life, I suppose, in terms of the ups and downs and what comes with it. So let's talk about us. How did we meet, Laura?
The short version of the story is that Shannon and I started to work together about 7 years ago now, and we just became sort of best friends from there, didn't we? When you meet certain people who are your people, you know how it goes. You just end up getting to know each other, and we just became really close really quickly, and the rest is history, really.
And I think I'm one of those people that if I like you, I'm like, oh, so we're friends now. So you're my best friend? Okay, cool. We're friends forever. You're stuck with me.
I think this is the interesting thing about our friendship, is that we'd already been through so much together. A lot of ups, a lot of downs as well. We supported each other through the happy and the sad times, didn't we? But Shan and I didn't bond necessarily initially over grief. You often find that people become closer because of grief, right? Because it's impossible to understand really what somebody's going through unless and until, unfortunately, you go through it yourself. So we're in a bit of a unique situation, aren't we, in that we already had that friendship. And then, of course, we had to sort of navigate our own grief, but also help each other through that as well. So
I think if you think back to our friendship, me and Laura I've seen Laura buy her first house. I've seen Laura, I was maid of honour at our wedding. We've had promotions together, literally, where we both got promoted at the same time into pretty much the same role. We've seen each other move jobs, and Laura had children, and that was all before mum and dad passed away. So we just had a real bond that you don't often get. I think I would say our friendship's quite special on that level. It's not one that you see often. People would say, when we used to work together, they used to say, you two are joint at the hip. Do you not do anything? We used to go to the toilet together. We used to do everything. If we needed to, you know, yeah, I'll go with you. Come on. Want a cup of tea? Yeah, come on. I'll go make one with you. Everything.
Yeah.
Oh, you're having a meeting. Should I be in it?
Absolutely. Just invite myself, even if I'm not invited, to be honest.
That's kind of where our friendship started, and then unfortunately Laura's mum passed away, which we're going to talk a little bit more about, and then 4 months and a day later my dad passed away, both in very sudden tragic circumstances. So we've been on a real journey and I think I'm so grateful that we were so close already, because that definitely made it easier. But we're quite aware that not many people have those friendships, and then both parents die at a very similar time frame, and we've gone through grief together. Literally, it's been through thick, thin, hard, sometimes happy, more happiness now, and we've really done that together. And this podcast, weirdly, came from a dream and not one of those dreams that says, oh, I've been wanting to do this my whole life. I literally went to bed one night, woke up, was like, wow, what a weird dream. Me and Laura started a podcast. I messaged her or voice noted her, which is usually the case with me and Laura, 10-minute voice notes. I was like, how weird's this? I had this dream that me and you started a podcast together. And what did you say?
I was like, actually, I think that's a great idea. I don't think it's weird at all.
And that's why we're basically both sat here.
Hype gals.
Yeah.
We hyped each other up on it. And I think that's important as well, right? Because Shan recognised, I think we've talked about it briefly before, haven't we, in passing, but when we both lost our parents, we tried to find podcasts or resources that could kind of help you through online. I think anybody who's going through this right now will probably have done the same. And absolutely, there's some great stuff out there, but we found that a lot of it was quite serious and a little bit heavy, actually. And of course, it should be in certain circumstances, absolutely. But sometimes you need something a little bit more comforting, a little bit more reassuring. And given that we've both been through it, we can give more relatable scenarios that hopefully for any of you out there who are going through this right now, maybe you do feel a little bit alone, or maybe you do feel like other people don't quite get it. And we wanted to make sure that there was something accessible for you to be able to listen to and to have that safe, open space, if you like, to feel like you aren't on your own, because you absolutely are not. It's unfortunate that this is actually quite a common thing, but it's just not spoken about very openly, is it? So that's why we thought we would create something where we did just that, really.
Yeah, and I think we're really lucky that we've got each other. And we've both said, you know, there comes a point where maybe if you've got siblings or you've got friends or, you know, a partner or whoever you would normally talk to these things about, there comes a point where at times it's a bit awkward. If they're also grieving or, you know, people stop asking you. People stop asking you, how are you? You know, how are you finding things? And we've always been able to pick up the phone and speak to each other because, well, one, you know, when your mum passed away, you were still obviously very early days, so we were regularly talking about it anyway. And then when my dad passed, we've just continued it.
Yeah.
And we want to create a space so that you've all got your Shannons and your Lauras, which is essentially, you know, we're here to listen, we're happy to take questions, all those sorts of things, where if you don't have someone right now who you think you can regularly speak to or have a safe space to talk about your loved one that you've lost, then, you know, this is what this is for. And we're hoping to create something that is special to a lot of people. And what we said is, even if it's not, it's cathartic for me and you. We're talking anyway, right? So might as well plug a load of mics in and...
Yeah, even if it just helps, like we said, just even one person, like that's huge for us, because we, you know, we've been through it. We know how hard it is, and truly it is earth-shattering, right? Especially when it first happens. It's incomprehensible for anyone to go through this kind of stuff. And we wanted to make sure that we could focus on different themes and topics, didn't we, as well, so that if at any point you wanted to look more specifically on how relationships have changed or what to kind of expect on that front, or support that we found was helpful and what we didn't find helpful as well. And that will look different for everyone, right? But I think it's important that one of the big things that I've focused on speaking to somebody about recently, actually, who's also going through early stages of grief, was you're never ever going to be in a position where you regret reaching out to somebody who's grieving, right? And I've heard this so many times by, you know, friends and loved ones who have said to me, oh, we didn't want to check in or to ask you how you were because we didn't want to upset you or to trigger you or whatever. And I totally get that. I know from that perspective you think you're probably trying to be caring, but always check in. Even if you feel like, oh, I don't need to, or I don't want to upset them, I think it's always better to give somebody the opportunity or the permission to say, actually, no, I'm okay. I don't want to talk about it right now, versus not checking in, right? Because Shannon and I definitely will remember there were so many people that did check in the early days, and that sticks with you forever, right? The people that do check in on you, and unfortunately, as time goes on, that happens less frequently. But
sometimes it's people that you never expected to.
Yeah.
But I think sometimes people find, like, I've definitely reached out to people since losing Dad that I wouldn't normally talk to, but when I saw that their partner passed away, or their dad passed away, or their mum, or whoever it is, you have that, I feel like I get it. Let me come talk to you.
It's a different perspective. It's like a whole different world, isn't it, when you have been through it?
And like you said, Laura, we had each other, right? And we still felt like we needed to find comfort in something and look for podcasts and conversations, but it's quite limited. Like you said, the ones that are out there are really, really good, but for whatever reason, if you don't like them, or maybe, like you said, maybe some of the topics are quite sad or unrelatable just to some degree, there's not really much else. Whereas if you want to listen to a comedy podcast, there's thousands of them out there, and tons, that you can listen to, completely depending on what your sense of humour is and what you like. Whereas in this space, it is really limited. I think specifically in the UK, it's still a massive taboo subject. People hate to talk about death. I've always found quite a lot of comfort in talking about, my dad and what went on. But not always. Obviously, there's days that I don't. But in general, I don't find it a topic that I don't want to speak about. But a lot of people may assume that you would. So like you said, they stop asking because they think, oh, I don't want to upset you, or I don't want to bring anything up that would be upsetting. So I think it's probably, to give a bit of context in terms of time frames, maybe do you want to talk about how far you are into your grief journey?
Yeah, so it's just been my mum's 2-year anniversary. So I lost Mum on the 22nd of September 2022. So it's just passed. And the run up to it was much harder for me, wasn't it? The days before were way harder for me than the actual day of the event itself. And that's the other thing, right? I think a lot of people assume that the big events and the big milestones are the hardest, and they absolutely are, don't get me wrong, but it's interesting how sometimes it isn't those days that you find harder than others. Actually, it can be something really small actually that really sets you off and causes a grief bomb, or like I say, the days before Mum's anniversary were the ones that I struggled way more, and then it got to the anniversary itself and I kind of felt numb in a sense, because for me it's still something that I'm in a little bit of denial about, isn't it? I think I still very much have days, and Shan, I know you're the same, where you almost have to believe it hasn't happened, which I know sounds crazy, but just to be able to manage and to get through that day on some of your really tough days, you almost have to just imagine that they're still with us. And I do that all the time. And I'm not crazy, I know she's not here. But when I'm really struggling to accept that she isn't here, I'll just imagine that she's having a brew at her house and that she's still in this world, because it's too painful to accept the alternative. And I think especially because, as Shan mentioned, in the 2 years since Mum's passed, it's crazy that I think more's happened in my life than has ever happened that Mum's missed out on. And that in itself is a grief journey, because I've had 2 children in the space of 2 years. My brother got married. My sister qualified in her masters that my mum always encouraged and pushed her to do, because she knew it was something that she really, really wanted and knew she would be great at. And yeah, it's mad to think how much can happen in such a short period of time since losing them. So I think that's also a big thing that we'll talk about, isn't it? That there's a lot of things that you feel so sad about because happy moments are kind of tainted because they should be here and they aren't, and you've got to find some way to honour them and to feel as though they are here.
Yeah, and my dad would have passed, it'll be 2 years in Jan the 23rd, which happens to be the same day as my anniversary with my partner, which
yeah. Thanks for that, John.
Cheers, John. But for me, that is such an epitome of what life is, you know, a celebration and also, you know, the grief of loss all in one day. And I know, you know, the last 2 years, you know, or nearly 2 years for me, 2 years for you, has been such a journey. And again, we'll go into more detail, but, you know, I've got engaged, I've changed jobs. There's been so much that's happened similar to you, and that definitely continues where you go, oh, I wouldn't say it makes you miss them more than ever, but it's certainly the big things in life that you go, that instant reaction in your brain that goes, oh, I'll go tell them, I'll go speak to them. You know, obviously we can't, not physically anyway. So yeah, I think that kind of gives a bit of a roundup as to a brief overview of our stories, and then we wanted to dedicate an episode each to really honouring our parents' story and telling, you know, the tale of what happened for each of them, giving you guys context to who they were as people. But for me and Laura, I think it's important to say that we're very open about this subject and about things in general. And, you know, there's kind of nothing left unsaid. We want to do this and be completely brutally honest about the good, the bad, the ugly of grief. And there's definitely, I know this sounds like a weird thing to say, but there is some good points that come on the back of it. And I think a lot of those are relationship based.
It's such a big journey. It is. Like, even 2 years on, it's different, right? I think one of the things that bothers me a little bit, and this is solely because I'm sort of 2 years into the experience or the journey, if you like, is people say that grief gets easier. I don't actually necessarily agree with that. I think it changes. Grief changes. It doesn't get easier. I think that's the wrong expression, isn't it? I think it's more a case of the pain stays the same actually, but you just learn to carry it and to manage it better. That's the difference. It's not, I think it minimises grief a little bit, and it minimises the loss of your loved one if you say, oh, it gets easier, because it
But I kind of get it, because I think, you know, early days when people say to you it doesn't get easier, that hurts a bit more, because you think, oh God, I understand why people say it, because it's almost like a bit of hope. And you know what, you should have hope, because this time last year I didn't think I'd be in the headspace where I am now. So like you said, I don't think it gets easier in terms of the pain. It's more of, you're more well equipped to carry it. I was thinking about it the other day, and I'm sure other people have said this, but the way I sort of looked at it is, if I was doing all my shopping, and this is to me how it felt, and I had no carrier bags with me and I had to carry it all, and I was trying to, you know, it was all on my shoulders and I was carrying it, it was hard, and I was nearly dropping things, and everything was sort of, how am I going to carry this all home? What am I going to do? And then, you know, 2 years on, I feel like I've got a trolley now that's still, everything that I was carrying is still there, but now it's a trolley and it's a bit easier for me to push. And sometimes all of a sudden it might be that you're trying to push that trolley uphill, but in general the weight of it becomes
easier to carry, doesn't it? That's the difference, isn't it? It becomes more, you can cope better, and it does feel like in those early days that you'll never get to that point. We've both been there, haven't we? Where I remember so vividly Shan saying to me, "Oh bloody hell, Lord, like when does this get easier? Like when does it get to a point where you feel, like you can sort of carry on and find your new normal, because it is a new normal, right? And you're never going to go back to the same normality as you knew it as such, but it does get to a point where you are able to feel happiness and joy again, and you can get through the day with, you know, looking at pictures of them and listening to voicemails or looking at messages and not crying your heart out like you would have done in the early days.
Even talking, right?
Yeah.
Even me and you sat here talking now, I think even 6 months ago we would have struggled.
Yeah, definitely.
Because sometimes it's especially, you know, there's some uncomfortable things that me and Laura are going to have to talk about as part of this podcast. And I think we're both in a place now. Well, don't get me wrong, I'm sure at some point you'll see some tears, guys. But it's...
Tiny tears over here.
Yeah.
Shannon, not me.
Yeah, I cry everything. Literally. We're in a position now where we feel comfortable to talk about it, but also that hopefully we can give something back to people that are on that journey. And you might be 8 years in. You know, someone reached out to me the other day that said that their mum passed away 8 years ago and they still, you know, struggle with certain bits and pieces. And I thought, like, this isn't necessarily just for people that have just lost someone. No. You could be so many years into that grief, and a lot of people don't deal with it early on, and they...
you suppress it, don't you? Like, sometimes that's a coping mechanism as well. Sometimes it feels like there's an expression, isn't it, that you're not going through your grief, and instead you sort of push it to one side because it's really painful. It's really hard, especially when it first happens, to even accept that it's happened, isn't it? It's just there were days when I first lost Mum where I woke up and I felt like I was going through the day I lost her again and again and again, because your brain for a second like forgets.
Yeah, and I think as well it's for both me and Laura, we lost our parents suddenly, and I feel like I didn't start grieving until months in because I was in so much shock.
Yeah.
And I know that you felt the same. The way I describe my grief, and I don't know if yours is the same, Laura, I don't know if we've ever spoke about it specifically, but I felt like it was an out-of-body experience.
Yeah.
Like I was so disassociated to life and the day-to-day of life. It was like I could see myself and everybody else talking, but I was so removed. I was just in this little grief bubble, and I just spent I couldn't even put a timeline on it, because I think for most people when you lose someone it's a blur. Like you can't work out, oh, was it 2 months in when I started to feel that, or was it 3 months? Like I couldn't tell you. The last 2 years has kind of been such an up and down roller coaster. I've had good days, I've had bad days, I've had good weeks and bad months. You know, there's been times where it has got pretty deep, and I think if you're feeling that at the moment, don't feel like you're the only one that's felt it. There's, you know, we've all kind of been in that space, and it's normal, because I think I definitely worried about that. Like, I think because you see other people that have lost parents, and I'm sure people will look at us now and be like, wow, look, you know, they're happy, they seem to be doing great. And when you see that, when you're in those early days, you think, I'm not normal. How are they able to just move forward with life? I feel like I'm never going to feel that ever again. I don't think I'll ever smile again. I definitely had those thoughts and feelings, and yet I'm sat here now, and grief is still a massive, massive part of my life, and I think it will be. But in general, I'm really happy with my life. I'm really happy with where I'm at. It's taken me a while to get back to a place where I can say that, you know, I'm happy day to day, but I am. So hopefully that gives people, a bit of confidence that if you're in that space, that listen, there'll come a time where, and it might be for 2 minutes of your day, and gradually it gets more and more, and then all of a sudden, you know, you drop back down again, because grief is definitely not linear.
No. Yeah, it's very up and down, isn't it? And I think in the early days, it's very intense, you know, and you're in survival mode almost, aren't you? Like, you've just got to sort of get through the day, and that's the most important thing, right? It doesn't matter if you don't leave the house that day and you get dressed or you don't get dressed. Even just the small things are like sort of mini victories in those early days, because
getting out of bed was a big victory at times.
Massive, isn't it? And that happens even years on, right? It's just, it doesn't happen every day, I hope. And that's what's so tricky, isn't it? To begin with, I think you feel as though it's a pain that will never end, and you just think, how can you carry on without them, and why is the world sort of still spinning when they're not in it? It's mad, isn't it? You feel like an anger. Like, my brother used to say it to me all the time, like, bless him. Unfortunately, when my brother goes to work, he has to drive past my mum's house, and even now, I think we talk about it a lot. He really struggles to drive past there. He finds it really hard because he used to pop in to see her. He'd go in for a brew or for tea or whatever, and obviously he isn't able to do that anymore. And that's so hard to sort of comprehend, that somebody that you loved so much and that you cared about so much that you could just pop in to see whenever, suddenly that disappears, and you kind of take that for granted. I think you just think, they'll be there forever. I just didn't ever think I would lose my mum, which I know sounds crazy because obviously, unfortunately everybody has their time, right? But to me, it almost felt like mum she'd be here forever. She was immortal in my in my eyes.
I think that's really interesting to talk about, because I think that's a massive cultural thing. Because we don't talk about death so openly. I don't know if people are listening that aren't from England, but and from the UK, but I feel like it's not openly talked about. Like, I've definitely had friends and family where people have pretty much been on their deathbed, and yet no one's talking about it. No one's talking about what happens once they go, and I think it will be a topic of ours where we talk about funerals and stuff and planning, because fucking how do you plan a funeral when you've never done that before? So that's definitely a subject that we'll bring up. But a lot of people I know in different countries and different cultures, they have their funerals planned out, and I know that's definitely becoming a bit more of a thing, and some people do it, but I think because it's such a taboo subject, we just don't talk about death and loss, and a lot of people are scared of it, aren't they, in terms of a big fear of dying. So it just becomes one of those things that actually is quite easy to sit there and go, oh God, no, they'll never die.
You just don't imagine. It's that whole thing, isn't it? Oh, it'll never happen to me. And especially, any loss is horrendous. Especially when it's somebody that you care about so much, and someone who is a really big part of your life. But I think Shannon and I have said before, haven't we, that I think the thing with sudden and unexpected loss as well is the fact that you do have to deal with the shock before you can grieve. I don't think you've got that brain or the emotional capacity to do both, because it's so traumatic when, and like Shan said, we'll get into this in more detail, but I spoke to my mum for hours before she passed away, and she was absolutely fine. No symptoms of sickness, illness, or anything like that. She was, and to suddenly try and wrap your head around that for four hours after speaking to your mum, that she's suddenly not here anymore, your brain just can't wrap its head around that. It just doesn't make logical sense, and then the rational side of your brain, I guess, goes into overdrive. It's like, how can that happen? Like, why did it happen? Could I have done this to stop it? Why didn't this happen? And you just overanalyze and overthink everything to try and compensate for the pain that you're feeling, because that's easier than accepting the fact that they're gone, isn't it?
Yeah. And I think you mentioned before that that the emotions that you feel early on, in your anger and all those kind of things, they're all really normal and very common. And I think you only have to look into it sort of online, and I definitely did, in terms of the steps of grief and what do they look like. And I think I'd read, and I agree, that not everybody goes through all of them, and not everybody does them in the same order.
No.
But I definitely felt a intense. I'd said it to you before, I remember being in Tesco and breaking down into tears and just being like, how are people just doing their shopping? Like, how are you just walking around picking up a loaf of bread? Like, my whole world's falling apart. And it felt so big and so heavy that it felt like everybody else's should be as well, because there's no way that I can feel this intensely and it not be just like worldwide pain. I don't know.
it's such a normal feeling, and like I've said to you before, like bizarrely, we had a similar experience, didn't we? That it isn't always the big events that are the hardest. Like, I will never forget going into Tesco to get a meal deal, and I'm not much of a crier, Shan will tell you, but I cried because I saw a bag of beef hula hoops, right? Because my mum loved them. And in that moment, I bet, there was people in there thinking, oh my gosh,
is she all right?
Is she all right? She's crying into a bag of hula hoops.
She wanted ready salted.
It's not that deep, love. But yeah, that set me off. It and it's like the whole Peter Kay thing.
We joked about this
the Quavers
so
wrapper,
much.
of the packet of crisps, and it's little things like that where and sometimes it's lovely, right? You get to a point when you are starting to cope a little bit better, that you can smile and it brings you some comfort to think about those things. But it's daft in the early days. It's pretty.
We were joking.
Horrific.
We joked about it so much because we'd both been through. Obviously, we're going through the same thing. It's mad what your brain does. Like, I remember having like a tomato soup and being like, oh, my dad liked tomato soup. And
It's just everything, yeah.
It's like, I don't even know if my dad really liked tomato soup, but my brain was, everything was
Clings
like...
onto
and
memories, doesn't it?
It kept reflecting back to things. It was like I wasn't able to think about anything without my dad being part of my thoughts, even if usually it wasn't something that would make me think of him. Like, it wasn't like... I saw someone with, getting to it, my dad was covered in tattoos. But it wasn't like I saw something like that and go, oh gosh, reminds me of my dad. It was everything. Yeah. Everything and anything was like, oh, I wonder if my dad would have liked that. Oh, I wonder if...
And the radio is another level. Every song that comes on, you're like,
bloody hell.
Mum loved this. Like, George Michael came on so much. I mean, it's smooth FM, right? So, like, Mum used to have it on all the time in the kitchen. And let's be honest, George... He's on there a fair bit.
He's pretty smooth.
But every time I heard it, I was like, oh my gosh, that's Mum. That's Mum.
Yeah.
Like, why are they playing these songs so much more frequently? And they're not. I think you're so hyper-focused that suddenly you just feel like, oh, it's a message, it's a sign from Mum,
Yeah. And we'll talk about signs. We'll do a full episode on that because bloody hell, you hang on to them for dear life. And I think they're a good thing. I think they're, and there's definitely some that we've had that you think, wow, that would be near impossible to not be. But then you also, like you said, Peter Kay, there's a Quaver packet. You're like, oh, there's all in. Like,
yeah. It's awful, like we say, to begin with. It's painful. Like, you sit down and you break down in tears. But I think as more time goes on, like we said, it doesn't get easier, but you can start to see that gives you a little bit of like a sense of hope, and you can have a little smile and you can have a little laugh to yourself.
Oh,
about
I laugh about it
things
all the time.
you did. And
sometimes I get something now where I'm like, oh, I reckon that's a sign from Dad, and sometimes they can be inconvenient, and I go, it's all right, John, we've not forgot about you, love. We know you're still there. You don't need to keep sending me all these signs. I know you're there. I've not forgot about you. I still think about you every day.
You'll have different signs as well, won't you? Like I always say to my sister and my brother, because my mum had three kids, the three of us, and my sisters are maybe like more of the traditional things. So hers are, if she ever sees a white feather, that's a big one for Sarah, my sister, and a robin.
Yeah, robin and feathers are super common, aren't they? And I definitely relate to that with Sarah. It's something that I think my family have picked up on in the past and have said about, and it's something that when I'd lost previous family members, my great nan, that's something that I felt like I was picking up on more, and they're quite commonly spoke about. And I kind of... Do you know what? I think whatever makes you feel better.
Yeah, it doesn't matter what it is.
What harm does it have in thinking that it's a sign from your, somebody that you loved and lost? I think, and sometimes people can be a bit, right. But I think, do you know what harm's it doing? If I want to think that my dad's dropped a feather on my bloody... right in front of me, then let me think my dad's dropped a bloody feather right in front of me.
Exactly. And sometimes it does happen in those moments where you need it the most as well. It's one of those things, isn't it? Like, we'll talk more about sort of this another time as well, but I have two little girls now as well, don't I? So I unfortunately lost Mum when my first daughter Sienna was only 10 and a half, 11 weeks old. And I've since recently had another little girl, Eleni, and the amount of people who said to me, you know, she's a blessing from your mum, she's been sent from your mum. And I never used to sort of be super spiritual, maybe to a point, but I think losing mum has made me more so.
Yeah, I agree.
And I do believe that now. Like when people say to me, oh, you know, she was sent to you at a time when you probably needed that a little bit more than you ever did before, because I think when you first go through such a significant loss, you feel a bit like almost like worthless, or like what's the point in existence, which I know sounds really awful and really deep, but you do, don't you? You're like, how do you sort of carry on? And actually, even though it was really hard to have lost my mum in the early stages of motherhood, and I always hoped I would share that with her, obviously, I think one of the big things for me was that they gave me that sense of purpose. You know, you can't not get up and out of bed when you've got a newborn baby. You've got to be able to put your own feelings aside and just get on with it. And that's what my mum used to do. And I think back now, and I think she, I hope, would have been proud that I was able to sort of do that, because that's how she lived her life. She always put everybody else before her. So yeah. Yeah,
and I think it's like you said, it's finding those things that get you up out of bed. You know, for me, I don't, you know, I didn't have a baby to look after or things like that, but you definitely at times have to find that reason to get up and out. And as much as I am a real advocate for feeling your grief and sitting in it and making sure that you are addressing things, distractions, in my opinion, and listen, me and Laura aren't therapists or counsellors or grief experts, but for me personally, at times I needed a distraction, and I needed my partner Jamie to say, switch your phone off.
It's too much to bear otherwise, isn't it?
Let's go for a walk, leave your phone in the car, because you get a lot of messages early on, hell of a lot of messages, and like Laura said, they're actually nice and they're good to have, but at times it's overwhelming. So it's definitely anything slightly off topic, but I would say to somebody, if you are reaching out to someone, I've always found that it was really lovely for people to say, don't feel like you need to respond. Yeah. Because sometimes actually the message itself is so nice to receive, but the idea of having to text 50 people back and that's day to day, let alone bloody when it's about grief.
It's hard, isn't it? You feel, and those are the most lovely messages. Like any message is really comforting, actually. Like we said, don't ever feel like you shouldn't reach out. You should always give someone the opportunity that's grieving to receive that, I think. But yeah, the messages that were sent that said, you know, I'm not going to ask you how you are, because there's absolutely no point asking that.
It's shit, we know.
Yeah, it's shit. And we had so many messages that said that, you know, we know it's really shit what you're going through right now. But just letting you know that we're thinking of you. Like, it goes a really, really long way, doesn't it?
Yeah, definitely. Anyway, should we round it up there in terms of first episode? We hope you guys have got a bit more context in terms of me and Laura, how we met. You know, if it's not obvious, our parents are dead. And that's kind of what led us to the podcast in the first place. But, you know, just as I suppose a bit of a roundup on what we spoke about, this is really important to us because we want people to feel like there is a place that they can come and listen, and there will be laughter. I'm sure there'll be tears from me, definitely at some point. But this is a safe space for anyone to come and listen and feel, you know, hopefully that they can relate to us in some way. And, you know, feel free to reach out as well to me or Laura. Like we said, we're not therapists, we're not counsellors, but we've got an ear. We're here to listen if you want to speak to somebody who might be fit, you know, might have felt how you feel, or
real life experience as well, right? I think that's the other thing. It can feel quite lonely when, even if your family and friends who adore you and will do everything they can to comfort you, that's so special and so important. And obviously you're always going to be super grateful to have that, aren't you? But
they don't get it.
The truth is they don't get it. And our partners always say this to us, right? And that's hard. And again, that's why we say this is going to be hopefully a safe space for partners, family, friends who have someone that they love that's going through grief, because it is bloody hard. It's really hard to know what to say and what will help to ease somebody's pain. And the truth is, you definitely can't in the early days.
Well, and I kind of relate to that, because obviously for you in those first 4 months, as your best friend, I was devastated for you, and I would have loved to have been able to help you. And I think I said it on the kind of clip that we released. Like, I just remember saying to you, now I get it, and I'm so sorry that you've been through that, because now I can feel those emotions. I can't even begin to, imagine what the last 4 months, and actually I'm scared because now I've got those 4 months ahead of me. And being able to talk to each other and talk each other through it has been great. And we just hope that we can be that for somebody else, because we were able to be it for each other.
Yeah, definitely. So.
But give us a follow on social media. We're on Instagram. This will be released on YouTube. You should be able to get this on Spotify, hopefully maybe Apple Music as well. We're just in the teething processes of starting up a podcast.
There's a lot to it, by the way.
There bloody is. I've been a busy bee. But so we'll put some things out on social in terms of where you can follow us. But Instagram, No Time to Cry podcast, TikTok, and YouTube, and like I said, Spotify as well. So give us a follow, give us a message if there's anything in particular that you wanna hear, or you wanna hear us speak about, or I'm hoping at some point we can kind of use this space as an opportunity maybe to speak about some people's loved ones if they want to tell us about them. And give them almost like a platform to shout from the rooftops about their kind of grief and the people that they've loved and lost as well. But thank you for listening, and we will be back with more.